The sky over East Anglia was the color of old steel. November 1944. The kind of morning where the fog didn't lift so much as it grudgingly retreated, leaving the airfield at Thorpe Abbotts wrapped in cold dampness that seeped through leather jackets and into bones. The ground crews moved like ghosts through the mist, their breath visible in short bursts as they hauled bombs, topped off fuel tanks, and ran final checks on the B-17 flying fortresses lined up along the hardstands. Crew Chief Master Sergeant Ed Kowalski stood beneath the nose of the Pale Horse, his B-17G, watching the armament crews load the last of the 500-pound general-purpose bombs into her belly. 24 years old with hands scarred from 300 hours of maintenance work, Ed knew every rivet, every wire, every temperamental quirk of this particular aircraft. Serial number 43 to 38,635. 31 missions completed. She'd brought her boys home every single time, though not always in one piece and never without scars. "She's good to go, Lieutenant," Ed called up to the pilot standing by the forward hatch. First Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Harlow nodded, his face drawn and pale in the weak morning light. 22 years old. Too young to have those shadows under his eyes, too young for the slight tremor in his hands that he tried to hide by keeping them in his pockets. But 31 missions over Germany had a way of aging a man faster than years ever could. "Thanks, Ed." Jimmy's voice was quiet, steady, professional. "Oil pressure good?" "Number 3 engines running a little hot, but nothing outside parameters. I adjusted the cowl flaps." "She'll hold." Behind them, the rest of the crew was assembling. Co-pilot Second Lieutenant Robert Chen checked his watch for the third time in as many minutes. Navigator Second Lieutenant David Goldman spread maps across the wing, making final calculations with a stub of pencil. Bombardier Second Lieutenant Frank Morrison smoked a cigarette down to the filter, then immediately lit another. Radio Operator Technical Sergeant William "Billy" Hayes carried his radio codes in a canvas bag, the weight of responsibility visible in the set of his shoulders. And then there were the gunners. Staff Sergeant Tom Richards, ball turret gunner, barely 19 years old with red hair and freckles that made him look even younger. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, tail gunner, who'd played semi-pro baseball in Detroit before the war. Staff Sergeant Joseph Kellerman, right waist gunner, quiet and methodical, the kind of man who cleaned his .50 caliber Browning M2 like other men polished their shoes. Staff Sergeant Anthony "Tony" Ricci, left waist gunner, whose laugh could be heard across the entire squadron. Technical Sergeant Raymond Foster, top turret engineer, with tattoos on both forearms and a wife back in Oklahoma who wrote him every single day. Technical Sergeant Carl Brooks, radio operator and gunner, who could fix anything electronic and quote Shakespeare from memory. 10 men. 1 aircraft. 1 mission. The briefing had been short and brutal. Target: synthetic oil refinery at Merseburg Luna, deep in central Germany. One of the most heavily defended industrial complexes in the Third Reich. 400 flak guns. Swarms of Luftwaffe fighters. The kind of mission where you counted losses in dozens, not singles. Expected casualties, moderate to heavy, the intelligence officer had said, his voice flat and emotionless as if he were discussing the weather rather than the statistical probability that a significant number of the men in that room would be dead before sunset. The assembled crews had sat in silence, smoking, not looking at each other. Now, standing beside the Pale Horse, Jimmy Harlow looked at his crew. His boys. His responsibility. Every single one of them could have finished their tours by now if they'd been on a different crew, a luckier crew. But they'd stayed together, mission after mission, because that's what you did. You didn't abandon your brothers. "All right, listen up," Jimmy said, his voice cutting through the morning stillness. The crew gathered around him, their faces illuminated by the scattered lights along the flight line. "You know the drill. Merseburg. Heavy flak, lots of fighters. We're flying deputy lead in the high squadron, so we hold formation no matter what. Goldman, I need your navigation perfect. Morrison, you get 1 pass at the target, Make it count. Foster, Chen, I need every gauge watched, every system monitored. We lose an engine, I need to know before the oil pressure drops. He paused, looking at each gunner. In turn. And you men on the guns, you keep your eyes open. Fighters will hit us on the way in and the way out. Maybe both. Call them out early, shoot straight, and for God's sake, watch your tracers. I don't want friendly fire taking out one of our own birds. Yes, sir, they murmured in unison. We've done this 31 times, Jimmy continued. We're good at it. We're a team. We get to target, we drop our bombs, we come home. Just like always. But even as he said it, Jimmy felt the lie settle heavy in his chest. It was never just like always. Every mission was Russian roulette played with flak shells and 20mm cannon fire. Every mission, men didn't come back. Just last week, Lucky Strike had taken a direct flak hit over Cologne and disintegrated in mid-air, 10 men gone in an instant. 3 days before that, Memphis Belle II had collided with Ragtime Cowboy during formation assembly, and both aircraft had gone down in the English Channel with no survivors. The odds caught up with everyone eventually. Mount up, Jimmy ordered. The crew moved to their positions with practiced efficiency. Jimmy climbed through the forward hatch and settled into the left seat of the cockpit, the familiar smell of hydraulic fluid, aviation fuel, and old sweat surrounding him. Chen slid into the right seat. Foster climbed up to the top turret position, checking the twin .50 caliber Brownings, charging the bolts, testing the traverse. Goldman spread his charts on the small table in the nose compartment beside Morrison, who was already checking the Norden bomb sight. Behind the cockpit, in the radio compartment, Hayes settled in with his equipment while Brooks took position at the radio operator's gun, a single .50 caliber that could be swung to cover the upper rear arc. Further back, in the waist section, Kellerman and Ricci took their positions at the side windows, each manning a .50 caliber on a flexible mount. The fuselage here was open, unheated, just aluminum skin and struts and the wind that would scream through once they were at altitude. Webb crawled back to the tail section, to the loneliest position on the aircraft, sitting backward, isolated, watching their rear as Germany passed beneath them. Richards squeezed into the ball turret underneath the fuselage, a sphere of plexiglass and steel barely large enough for a man, equipped with twin .50 calibers pointing down. It was claustrophobic, vulnerable, and absolutely essential. 13 .50 caliber machine guns. 5 tons of armor plating. 4,000 rounds of ammunition. And the silent prayer that it would be enough. Jimmy ran through the pre-flight checklist with Chen, their voices calm and professional over the intercom. Master switches. On. Fuel selectors. Main tanks. Mixture. Auto-rich. Propellers. Full increase. Superchargers. Low. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten. Across the airfield, other B-17s were coming to life, their right R-1820 Cyclone engines coughing, sputtering, then roaring into steady thunder. One by one, the 4 engines of the Pale Horse fired up, number 3, number 4, number 1, number 2, each one adding its voice to the growing symphony of power. The ground shook. The aircraft trembled. Jimmy felt the familiar surge of adrenaline and terror that came with every mission. 31 times they'd done this. 31 times they'd come home. But statistics were merciless. The 8th Air Force had a saying, you could beat the odds, but you couldn't beat the average. And the average said that most crews didn't make it to 30 missions. Thorpe Abbott's Tower, this is Pale Horse, requesting taxi clearance. Pale Horse, you're cleared to taxi. Take runway 27. Wind is light and variable. Godspeed. Jimmy released the brakes. The Pale Horse lurched forward, rolling along the taxiway with 42 other B-17s from the 100th Bombardment Group, the Bloody 100th, so named because they'd suffered some of the highest casualties in the 8th Air Force. They swung onto the runway, engines roaring, propellers clawing at the morning air. Jimmy advanced the throttles to full power, watching the gauges climb: manifold pressure, RPM, cylinder head temperature. 65,000 pounds of aircraft, fuel, bombs, and men began accelerating down the concrete, faster, faster, the tail wheel lifting, the ground falling away. And the pale horse climbed into the gray English sky, banking left to join the formation, carrying 10 men toward Germany and whatever waited for them there in the burning heart of the Third Reich. The formation took an hour to assemble. 43 B-17s from the 100th Bomb Group circling over the English countryside in a carefully choreographed dance of aluminum and steel, each aircraft finding its precise position in the combat box formation. High squadron, low squadron, lead squadron, stacked and staggered so that every gunner had a clear field of fire, so that the bombers could mass their defensive firepower and protect each other from the Luftwaffe fighters that would inevitably come. The pale horse flew in the number 2 position of the high squadron, tucked in tight on the wing of Devil's Advocate, the deputy lead aircraft. Close enough that Jimmy could see the pilot in the other cockpit, close enough that a moment's inattention could mean a collision. "Formation's looking tight, Lieutenant," Foster called from the top turret, his voice crackling over the intercom. "Good interval on all birds." "Copy that," Jimmy replied, his hands steady on the yoke, his eyes scanning the instruments and the aircraft around them. Flying formation wasn't just a skill, it was an art form practiced under conditions that would break most civilian pilots. Holding position for hours at a time, in all weather, often in cloud, sometimes under fire, maintaining precise spacing while fighting turbulence and prop wash from 42 other aircraft. Below them, England slipped away, replaced by the gray waters of the North Sea. The formation droned eastward at 18,000 feet, climbing slowly, engines working hard, burning fuel, counting miles. In the nose, Goldman hunched over his navigation table, checking landmarks through breaks in the clouds, correlating them with his maps, making careful notations. "We're on course, Lieutenant," he reported. "Crossing the Dutch coast in 12 minutes. "Copy. All gunners, test your weapons. Short bursts, watch your backstop." The intercom filled with a distinctive hammering of .50 caliber machine guns as each gunner fired a brief burst, checking function, clearing any ice from the barrels. The sound was reassuring. Power, readiness, the promise that they could fight back. But then the intercom went quiet again, and there was only the steady roar of the engines and the whistle of wind through gaps in the aircraft's skin. Richards, curled in the ball turret beneath the fuselage, rotated his position slowly, scanning the sky below and to the sides. Nothing yet. Just clouds and ocean. But his hands were already sweating inside his heated gloves, and his mouth was dry despite the stick of gum he'd been chewing since takeoff. In the tail, Webb sat backward in his isolated position, watching the formation trail out behind them. 21 aircraft in his view, their wings catching the weak sunlight that filtered through the clouds. Beautiful, in a strange way. And terrifying, because he knew that by the end of the day, some of those aircraft wouldn't be there anymore. "Dutch coast coming up," Goldman announced. 2 minutes. Jimmy felt his pulse quicken. This was where it started. The moment they crossed into enemy territory, everything changed. The flak batteries along the coast would open up. The German radar stations would track them. And somewhere out there, Luftwaffe fighter controllers were already scrambling their interceptors, vectoring them toward the American formation. "All positions, stay alert. Expect flak in 30 seconds. The coast appeared through a break in the clouds, a thin line of sand and dikes and German fortifications. And then the sky around them began to bloom with black flowers. Flak. 88mm anti-aircraft shells detonating at 18,000 feet, each explosion creating a sphere of shrapnel that could tear through aluminum skin and human flesh with equal ease. The shells burst in clusters, staining the sky with black smoke that hung in the air like accusatory fingers pointing at the bombers passing through. The pale horse shook as a shell detonated close enough to rattle the airframe. Jimmy held the formation position, fighting the instinct to jink, to dodge, to do anything except fly straight and level. Breaking formation was death. It left you alone, vulnerable, an easy target for fighters. Another burst, closer this time. Shrapnel pinged off the aircraft's skin like hail on a tin roof. "Flak at 2 o'clock level," Foster called out. "I see it," Jimmy said through gritted teeth. In the waist, Ricci flinched as a shell exploded so close that the concussion wave rocked the aircraft. Through his window, he could see Batlin Betty in the low squadron take a direct hit. The shell punched through the right wing, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then fuel began streaming from the ruptured tank, a glittering trail of vapor in the sunlight. The B-17 held position for another 30 seconds, and Ricci thought maybe they'd make it, maybe the leak wasn't that bad. And then the fuel ignited. The wing became a sheet of flame. The aircraft rolled slowly to the right, dropped out of formation, and began its death spiral toward the Dutch farmland below. Ricci counted 9 parachutes. One short. Someone hadn't made it out. "Betty's going down," he reported, his voice tight. "I see it," Jimmy acknowledged. "Hold your positions. Stay tight." The flak continued for another 5 minutes, and then they were through, racing inland over the Netherlands, and the sky was clear again except for the scattered puffs of smoke that marked where they'd been. But everyone knew this was just the beginning. "Navigator to pilot, we're on course. Turning south in 3 minutes toward the German border. Expect heavy fighter activity once we cross." "Copy that." The formation droned on, deeper into enemy territory. Below them, the Dutch countryside gave way to German industrial towns and forests. 28,000 American boys in 300 bombers spread across the sky, all heading for the same targets deep in the Reich. And then Hayes's voice cut through the intercom, sharp with urgency. "Multiple bogeys at 12 o'clock high. Looks like fighters." Jimmy's head snapped up. There, sunlight glinting off metal, high above them. Small shapes diving down, growing larger with terrifying speed. Focke-Wulf FW-190s. 8 of them. Maybe more. All gunners, targets at 12 o'clock high, coming in fast. The fighters rolled into their attack runs, and the formation erupted with defensive fire. Hundreds of .50 caliber machine guns opening up simultaneously, tracers arcing through the sky in streams of lethal geometry. The sound inside the Pale Horse was deafening. Foster's top turret guns hammering directly above the cockpit, the roar of engines, the whistle of wind, the rattle of spent shell casings bouncing off metal. A Focke-Wulf screamed past so close that Jimmy could see the pilot's face, could see the yellow spinner on the propeller, could see the muzzle flashes from the fighter's nose-mounted cannons. Shells stitched across Devil's Advocate ahead of them, punching holes through the aluminum skin. "Brake right! Brake right!" Someone was screaming on the radio. But Jimmy held his position. "You didn't break. You never broke." Richards in the ball turret swung his guns upward as a FW-190 flashed past beneath them, so close he could have reached out and touched it. He fired a long burst, his tracers walking up the fighter's fuselage, and was rewarded with a spray of coolant from the engine. The FW-190 rolled away, trailing white smoke. "Got hits on one," Richards yelled. "He's leaking." But there were more. So many more. They came in waves, FW-190s from the front, Messerschmitt Bf-109s from the sides, attacking the formation with coordinated precision. The German pilots knew the B-17's weak spots, knew where the armor was thin, knew that the best way to kill a bomber was to kill the pilots. Webb in the tail turret tracked a Bf-109 making a run from 6 o'clock low. He waited, letting the fighter close, then squeezed the triggers. His twin .50s roared, and he saw his tracers converge on the fighter's wing root. Metal peeled away. The 109 snap-rolled and dove away, possibly hit, possibly just evading. One breaking away from 6 o'clock. Webb reported. The attack lasted 7 minutes that felt like 7 hours. And then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, the German fighters broke off, diving away to rearm and refuel before making another pass. Jimmy exhaled slowly, realizing he'd been holding his breath. His hands were locked so tight on the yoke that his knuckles were white. Damage report. All positions, check in. Top turret okay. Ball turret okay. Tail okay. Right waist okay. Left waist, Ricci's voice paused. We took some hits back here. Got some holes in the fuselage, but nothing critical. No hydraulic leaks that I can see. Radio room okay, but we've got some damage to the vertical stabilizer. Jimmy scanned the instruments. Oil pressure good. Fuel flow good. No fires. No major damage. But around them, the formation was starting to show gaps. 3 B-17s had fallen out, trailing smoke or fire or simply unable to maintain altitude. And they were still an hour from the target. Goldman, how much farther? We cross into central Germany in 15 minutes. Merseburg is 70 miles beyond that. We'll be over target in approximately 55 minutes. 55 minutes. 55 more minutes of flak and fighters and terror before they could drop their bombs and turn for home. If they made it that long. All positions, conserve ammunition. They'll hit us again before we reach target. Make every shot count. The formation pressed on, deeper into Germany, the engines droning steadily, the gunners scanning the sky with tired eyes, waiting for the inevitable next attack. And in that moment, flying through hostile skies, surrounded by death and destruction, the crew of the Pale Horse did what they'd done 31 times before. They endured, they fought, and they kept each other alive through whatever came next. The second wave of fighters hit them 20 minutes later, and this time, the Germans weren't holding back. 30 FW-190s and Bf-109s appeared like a swarm, coming from multiple directions simultaneously. High, low, sides, even head-on attacks that required nerves of steel from the German pilots as they hurtled toward the bombers at a closing speed of over 500 miles per hour. Fighters. 10 o'clock high. More at 3 o'clock level. 6 o'clock low, coming up fast. The intercom became a chaos of voices, overlapping, urgent, everyone trying to call out targets while the formation's defensive fire turned the sky into a lattice of tracers. The noise inside the Pale Horse was overwhelming, the hammering of multiple machine guns, the roar of engines being pushed to maximum power, the whistle and crack of German 20mm cannon shells punching through aluminum skin. Foster in the top turret swung his guns toward a Bf-109 diving from 12 o'clock high, leading the target, firing in short, controlled bursts the way they'd taught him at gunnery school. His tracers reached out, and he saw them connect with the fighter's engine cowling. Smoke erupted, black and thick, and the 109 rolled away in a steep dive. Splash 1. Foster yelled. But even as he spoke, a FW-190 slashed past from 9 o'clock, its cannons blazing, and the Pale Horse shuddered as shells tore through the left wing. Jimmy felt the aircraft lurch, felt the controls go mushy in his hands. We're hit. Left wing. Chen was already scanning the instruments. Fuel pressure dropping on number 2 engine. We're losing fuel. Jimmy looked out his side window and saw the damage. Multiple holes in the wing, fuel streaming from a ruptured line, the raw aluminum torn and peeled back like the lid of a tin can. But the engine was still running, still producing power. How bad? We're hemorrhaging fuel, but number 2's still operational. If we shut it down now, we might save what's in that tank. Negative. We need all 4 engines until we clear German airspace. We'll feather it if it fails. In the waist, Kellerman tracked a fighter making a run from 3 o'clock, his .50 caliber bucking against his shoulder as he poured fire at the attacker. The fighter's wing lit up with muzzle flashes as it returned fire, and suddenly Ricci beside him screamed, "I'm hit! I'm hit!" Kellerman spun around. Ricci was on the floor, clutching his left leg, blood seeping between his fingers. A 20mm shell had come through the fuselage, missed Kellerman by inches, and caught Ricci in the thigh. "Pilot, left waist gunner is wounded." Kellerman shouted into the intercom while simultaneously dropping to Ricci's side, ripping open the first aid kit. "Looks like femoral artery. I need help back here." "Brooks, get back there," Jimmy ordered. Brooks unstrapped from his position and crawled through the bomb bay catwalk, fighting against the aircraft's movements, the freezing wind, the terror that was trying to paralyze him. He reached the waist section and saw Ricci on the floor, his face pale, his breath coming in short gasps. "Keep pressure on it," Brooks said, taking over from Kellerman, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He'd been trained as a medic before becoming a radio man. He wrapped a tourniquet above the wound, tightened it until the bleeding slowed to a trickle. "You're gonna be okay, Tony. You hear me? You're gonna be fine." Ricci nodded weakly, his lips blue from shock and cold. "Stay with him," Kellerman said, returning to his gun. The left waist position was now unmanned, one less .50 caliber defending them, one less set of eyes watching for fighters. And the fighters kept coming. A Bf-109 made a run from 6 o'clock level, and Webb in the tail turret met it with a steady stream of fire. But this German pilot was good, was experienced, and he held his course even as tracers chewed into his aircraft's wings. His cannons fired, and the tail section of the Pale Horse exploded in a shower of metal fragments. Webb felt something slam into his chest with the force of a sledgehammer. The breath went out of him. He looked down and saw red spreading across his flight suit, saw the torn metal of the turret, saw his own blood spattering the plexiglass. His hands fell away from the guns. "Tail gunners hit," someone was yelling. "Webb's not responding." But Webb couldn't respond. He could barely breathe. The world was going gray at the edges, and all he could think about was his wife back in Detroit, and whether he'd ever see her again. In the ball turret, Richards was fighting his own battle. AFW-190 had come up from beneath, attacking from the one angle that gave him a clear shot, and they'd both open fire simultaneously. Richards felt his aircraft shudder as shells ripped into the ball turret mechanism. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the plexiglass. The turret stopped rotating. "Ball turrets hit. I can't traverse. I'm stuck." Jimmy's mind was racing, trying to process multiple emergencies at once while simultaneously flying formation, watching for fighters, and keeping the Pale Horse in the air. 2 gunners down. 1 turret disabled. Fuel streaming from the wing. And they were still 30 miles from the target. "How's Ricci?" he demanded. "Stable for now," Brooks replied. "But he needs a hospital." "And Webb?" Silence on the intercom. Then Brooks's voice, quieter. "I think he's gone, Lieutenant." The words hit Jimmy like a physical blow. Marcus Webb. The quiet guy from Detroit who played baseball and never complained and had flown with them since their very first mission. Gone. "Pilot to ball turret, can you retract manually?" "Negative, sir. Hydraulics are shot. I'm trapped down here. Can you bail out?" "Not unless you retract the turret first, and we can't do that without hydraulics." Richards's voice was calm, matter-of-fact, but Jimmy could hear the fear underneath. If they had to make an emergency landing with the ball turret extended, Richards would be crushed between the ground and the aircraft's fuselage. Another fighter attack. More shells hammering into the airframe. Devil's Advocate ahead of them suddenly nosed over and began a steep descent, smoke pouring from 2 engines. 10 more men falling toward Germany, toward death or capture. The formation was disintegrating. Aircraft falling out, diving away, struggling to stay aloft. And still they pressed on, because the mission was to bomb Merseburg, and they would bomb Merseburg even if every single aircraft was shot to pieces in the process. Goldman, time to target? 12 minutes. IP coming up in 5. The initial point, the turn onto the bomb run. The point where they would fly straight and level, no evasion, no deviation, while the bombardier guided them onto target using the Norden sight. The point where the flak would be heaviest, where they would be most vulnerable, where every aircraft became a sitting duck. And they had to do it with 2 gunners dead or wounded, 1 turret disabled, and fuel streaming from a damaged wing. All positions, we're almost there. Just hold on. We get our bombs on target, and we're going home. But even as he said it, Jimmy saw another fighter formation forming up ahead of them. 20 more German fighters, fresh, fully armed, positioning for another attack run. And then the flak started. The sky over Merseburg turned black with explosions. 400 anti-aircraft guns firing simultaneously, filling the air with steel and death. Shells burst so close that the concussion waves rocked the Pale Horse violently. Shrapnel tore through the fuselage, puncturing fuel tanks, severing control cables, killing and maiming. IP in 1 minute, Goldman announced, his voice somehow steady despite everything. Morrison, it's your show now. In the nose, Frank Morrison hunched over the Norden bomb sight, making tiny adjustments, watching the target crawl across the crosshairs. The synthetic oil refinery complex spread out below them. Massive buildings, storage tanks, rail lines, all of it critical to Germany's war effort. All of it defended by more anti-aircraft guns than any other target in the Reich except Berlin itself. Pilot, Bombardier has the aircraft. Jimmy released his grip on the controls. The bomber was flying itself now, guided by the bomb sight, tiny servo motors making corrections too small for human hands. All he could do was watch and pray and try not to think about the flak and the fighters and the 2 men bleeding in the back of his aircraft. The Pale Horse shook as a shell exploded close enough to blow out 2 windows in the waist section. Freezing air rushed in at -40 degrees. Kellerman kept firing, his hands numb, his face frozen, ice forming on his oxygen mask. "Bomb bay doors open," Morrison announced. The drag increased. The aircraft slowed. More flak. An explosion so close that it tore off part of the right horizontal stabilizer. The aircraft yawed to the right. Jimmy fought the controls, keeping her level, keeping her steady. Bombs away. 10 500-pound bombs dropped from the Pale Horse's belly, falling away in a perfect stick, tumbling down toward the target 4 miles below. The aircraft lurched upward, suddenly 5,000 pounds lighter. Bomb bay doors closed. "We're clear." "Pilot has the aircraft," Jimmy said, already pushing the yoke forward, diving away from the hell of flak, turning northwest toward the rally point and the long run home. But the fighters weren't done. As if enraged that the bombers had completed their mission, the Luftwaffe hit them with everything they had left. And that's when Foster in the top turret took a 20mm shell through the chest. He died instantly, slumping forward in his harness, his guns falling silent. "Top turret's out," Hayes yelled. "Foster's down." 5 gunners now. Out of 10 crew members, 5 were dead or wounded or unable to fight. Half the defensive armament of the aircraft was gone. And they still had 300 miles of German-controlled airspace to cross before they reached the safety of England. The Pale Horse was dying. Fuel streaming from multiple holes. Hydraulics failing. 2 engines running rough. 1 turret jammed. Oxygen system damaged. And a German fighter ace had just spotted them, had just noticed that they were wounded and vulnerable, and was forming up his flight for the kill. Jimmy looked at Chen. Chen looked back. No words were necessary. They both knew what was coming. The final attack. The one that would either destroy them completely or be their last test before they could limp home. And then, through the intercom, Kellerman's voice, "Lieutenant, I've got an idea. It's crazy, but it might work. I'm listening."